My first story today is a US story, but it is very important to Canadian investors. It's the latest ISM Manufacturing PMI report, and it's again showing signs of trouble. The index dropped to 50.3 in February. That's down from 50.9 in January. It missed forecasts of 50.5. Now, anything above 50, that does still show growth out there, but this downward trend that we're seeing now, it does suggest that the manufacturing sector is definitely losing momentum. I want to look at what's going on here. I want to break it down. First of all, let's look at some key data. What changed? New orders dropped to 48.6. That's the lowest since March of 2022, and that's down from 55.1 in January. Employment fell into contraction territory at 47.6. That's down from 50.3. Production slowed sharply. That was at 50.7, down from 52.5. Price pressure spiked 62.4. That's the highest since June of 2022. That's up from 54.9 the month before. And inventory levels 49.9 versus 45.9. So when you look at all of this in aggregate here, we see orders being down, we see hiring slowing, prices are rising, supply chains are starting to feel the pressure. I want to look at what is driving this slowdown. What are the key aspects here? When you look at the report, it points to tariffs as a key factor. I mean, that's probably not a surprise to anyone. Now, according to ISM Chair Timothy Fiore, he says that the new administrative tariff policy is creating an operational shock that is leading to higher prices due to import taxes. He cites order backlogs and supply disruptions. Companies are adjusting to the new costs. Ongoing job cuts in the sector. Businesses seem to be holding off on hiring. And again, when you look at that in aggregate, you can see that the manufacturing numbers are starting to feel that ripple effect of the trade policy changes, and that could have longer term consequences, both for production, but also for employment. And this is a key as to why this matters here. If we look at this slowdown in manufacturing, it doesn't just impact, what do we think of factories? This will spill over into consumer prices, corporate earnings, and it could even probably will even affect the Federal Reserve policy as they're looking at that balance between inflation and economic slowing. Now, here's what I'm going to be watching next. First off, will the Federal Reserve address these rising price pressures? If we see that spike in manufacturing costs, that could make rate cuts less likely than what we're predicting right now. Also, will companies adjust to tariffs, or are we just going to see orders continue to shrink? And if we do see this decline in new orders, that would be another red flag. Are supply chains worsening? If deliveries keep slowing, then we could see production take even a bigger hit. Now, when I boil this all down, one thing for sure here is that manufacturing, as we see it in this report here, is at a bit of a pivot point, and what happens in the next few months is going to be critical. Now, I do want to stick with the tariff theme for the moment, and U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum are coming very shortly. The Canadian home builders are saying that this could be even worse than the ones that were imposed back in 2018. They're saying that we already have high costs. Developers are fearing that this could send home prices soaring and slow down construction even more. So I want to break it down here. The U.S. is set to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum starting on March the 12th. But here's the catch. Some of these products could be hit multiple times. Stocking tariffs, this could result in 50% on steel and 35% on aluminum. For home builders, this is a massive problem because these metals are essential for a lot of components of home building. We think of electrical components, we think of window frames, HVAC systems, obviously appliances, other big ticket items. And then you look at the structural materials that go into building a home. These are a big part of that process. Now, at the moment here, most building materials, they do pass through the U.S. at some point along that supply chain, and developers are saying that the cost increases could be extreme. Why would this be worse than in 2018? Well, builders are saying that this round of tariffs could be much more dangerous than when Trump first imposed them back in 2018. And they're saying construction costs are already 70% higher than they were back then. So that's a big thing. Pre-construction home sales are already in trouble. 70% of buyers used to be investors, but that contingent has pretty much largely disappeared now. And borrowing costs today are higher than they were back in 2018, and that makes it harder for developers to absorb these extra costs. So unlike before, developers just can't pass these costs through to buyers as easily because the demand for pre-construction homes, that's pretty much dried up as well. Listen to how Tariq Addy of Addy Development Group puts it. He says, it's literally like, throwing a proverbial match on a gasoline-doused house, if that image conjures up any thoughts. I mean, we have an already challenged industry. Let's take a look at what the potential job losses here. And it's important, it's not just the home builders who are worried. Steep tariffs on steel, aluminum, that could hit other major industries like manufacturing. That would lead to potential job losses. Hardest hit probably Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. Fewer people will be able to afford homes, most likely. And then mortgage defaults, which is already a big concern coming into the next year or so, will become higher up on the radar if that happens. One thing for sure is the tariffs are going to have an effect on the market. What are your thoughts? Do you think that we're looking at just a slowdown in construction, or will advisors find a way to adapt? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. Now, have you voted on this week's Pulse poll question? There's a lot of talk about Canadian companies relocating to the U.S. to avoid tariffs. This week's question is, would you support Canadian companies moving operations to the U.S. to avoid tariffs? Yes or no? So far, the vote has been very one-sided. You can click on the QR code here to share your thoughts. Now, as you just heard, trade tensions, they're heating up again. And with these new tariff threats, market uncertainty has spiked. This has left a lot of investors wondering how to respond. You can't predict the next policy move, but you can take control of your own portfolio with a defensive income generating strategy from Harvest ETFs. 3 funds in particular come to mind. The Harvest Healthcare Leaders Income ETF, ticker is HHL, and this fund provides stability through a diversified mix of leading healthcare companies, medical devices, diagnostics. Healthcare is the defensive sector that's built to weather uncertainty, and this fund has never missed out or cut a monthly distribution. I also think of the Harvest Equal Weight Global Utilities ETF, HUTL, which delivers essential infrastructure exposure with global diversification, and that reduces risks that are tied to interest rates and market shocks, while at the same time enhancing income with their covered call strategy. Or if you're looking for a higher monthly income with long-term growth, the Harvest Diversified Monthly Income ETF, HDIF. This fund combines a portfolio of Harvest ETFs with a modest leverage, 25%, to boost your potential income. You can learn more about these ways to ease your trade war tension by visiting harvestetfs.com. Now, over the weekend, President Trump put out a surprise announcement that his administration is working on what's called the Crypto Strategic Reserve. And this reserve would include popular cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether, as well as lesser-known assets, XRP, Solana, and Cardano. Bitcoin declined back up to around $90,000 after it had dropped below $80,000 last week. Altcoins also saw sharp spikes before gradually cooling off this morning. This move is in line with his previous campaign promises to support a national Bitcoin stockpile using assets seized by law enforcement actions. Now, it's the first time that he has suggested the government hold multiple cryptocurrencies. Now, Trump has sort of been trying to position himself as a champion of the crypto industry. Since taking office, he has taken steps to boost the sector, and this includes pausing SEC enforcement actions in a number of cases. And I find that very troubling, but they didn't call me and ask what my thoughts were. Now, Trump is set to discuss this plan further at the White House Crypto Summit, which is up this Friday. Industry leaders there are going to weigh in on the future of this initiative. Now, that is all for this episode. As always, I do say thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.